Chapter 4 Repeated Removal. As father often moved the center of his activities, we had to move house many times. When I was 5 years old, I left my birthplace for the first time. In the spring of that year, we moved to pt.4. At that time, I was not particularly sorry to part from my grandfather, grandmother, and family. Still young, I was curious about the unfamiliar place and the new things rather than concern about parting. But my heart ached that autumn when we moved to Jungang. My family was very sorry about having to move to the northern tip of the country. My grandfather would normally support father and not offer a contrary opinion, whatever he did. But he was stunned by the news that his son and grandsons would be going so far away. Father made great efforts to console my grandfather when he showed his sadness at the forthcoming parting. Still ringing in my ears is what father said, while giving my grandfather a helping hand in his work on the earthen veranda for one last time. Quote, "Watched, I cannot move freely within Korea. Upon my release from prison, they told me to stay away from the independence movement and farm at home. But I must fight, even if I am thrown into prison repeatedly. The Japanese are hard-hearted fellows. We cannot win back the country by merely cheering for independence." Unquote. The day we moved to Jungang, my elder uncle wept as he held my father's hand and asked him not to forget his home, even if he was far away, and to write to him often if he had no time to return. Father said, holding in his hands, "I will not forget my home. How can I forget it? This evil time forces us to part in this way, but when the country wins its independence, we will live together and lead a life full of pleasure. I believe. From a child, you have helped me by making sandals, getting blisters on your palms. I am sorry to leave this large family for you to keep." Unquote. Brother, it's nothing. I will take care of father and mother. Be sure to put up a good fight and achieve your cherished aim. I will wait here for that day. I could not repress my sorrow as I watched them part. Mother said that we would return home again when the country was independent. But I did not know when that would be, and felt myself choking. In fact, my parents were buried in a foreign country without seeing Mungyang Day again. Time and again I look back at my grandparents, so loath to part from them. I did not like to leave that place where I was born and grew up, but I felt relieved about one thing. I liked Jungung because it was far from Pyongyang. To tell the truth, I still felt uneasy even after my father was released from prison. I feared that the Japanese might send my father to prison again. In those days, I knew nothing of the world and was naive enough to think that in the mountains, far from Seoul and Pyongyang, there was neither prison nor Japanese. When I asked how far it was from Pyongyang to Jungang, someone told me that it was 250 miles. This relieved me. I did not think the Japanese would pursue us that far. Jungang was said to be the coldest place in Korea. I could easily stand the cold, if only father was safe. All our household goods we were to take were the bundle mother made of a few bowls and spoons and a haversack father was to sling over his shoulder. When we moved to Pongwari, we carried some boxes, a table, a brassware, and earthenware, but this time we had nothing to speak of. At that time, a friend of my father's accompanied us. Getting off the train in Sunyaju, we trekked along the way to Jungang, passing on Kechon, Huchan, and Kangji. At that time, there was no railway to Kangji. As we set out on the journey, my father was concerned, doubting that I would be able to walk such a long distance. Mother, too, seemed to fear that I would not keep up. As I was only 7 years old, my parents were naturally anxious about me. I got a lift on a passing cart at times, but walked most of the way. It was the first major physical trial of my life. At Kangye, we stayed overnight at the inn outside the Nam Gate, and the next day resumed our journey. The owner of the inn, together with the members of the underground organization in the Kangye area, warmly welcomed our party. The 125 miles from Kangye to Jungang covered many passes and such desolate scenery. Mother had a hard time when we crossed the Pengnan Pass. She was carrying 3-year-old Changju on her back and a load on her head, and had blisters on her feet, as she wore worn-out straw sandals. This caused her much trouble. When we arrived in Jungang, I was disappointed. There, too, the Japanese were swarming, like they did in Hangam and the Salmon Street in Pyongyang. The Korean people were wandering around, having been driven out of their native land, whereas the Japanese had come to this remote mountainous area and were lording it over the people there. Father said that wherever Koreans lived, there were Japanese. I learned that in Jungang, there were a police station, a prison, and some military police. On my arrival at Jungang, I realized that the whole of Korea had been converted into a sort of prison. The Japanese had taken over more than half the upper street of Jungang, where there were a school, some shops, and a hospital for them. The people of Jungang said that the Japanese imperialists had begun to stretch their tentacles of aggression there 10 years before, having wrested the right to fell trees in Korea after the conclusion of the Protectorate Treaty in 1905. The Japanese imperialists had set up a forestry administration in Sinuiju, and a branch of it in Jungang, and transferred their felling section there. It was a felling section in name only. In fact, it was a sort of paramilitary group, including many ex-servicemen who had received systematic military training, which could be called out at any time in case of emergency. Also in Gungjang, there were armed policemen and a garrison. Father had taken us to Jungang because he intended to set up a surgery there, which the independence fighters could frequent and, with it as a base, wage the anti-imperialist struggle more actively. The position of physician would enable him to hide easily from the enemy's surveillance and to contact people reasonably and freely. We settled at Kanki Rak's inn. Kanki Rak allotted us the quietest and cleanest room in the inn. My father had stayed there for a while on his way back from Jiando, where he had gone upon his release from prison. He used the room where my family stayed. Kanki Rak was both a dentist and a photographer. While running the inn, and he secretly maintained contacts with the organizations abroad of the Korean National Association and my father when he was active inside Korea, and between its organizations at home and him when he was active abroad. Though the inn father established contacts with the champions of independence movement active in those areas along the river Emnok, such as Lingjiang, Changbai, Jungang, and Pyeongdong, Changsong, and Chosun, and in other places at home and abroad. Being an influential figure in Jungang, Kang Ki-rak had free access to the government offices. The information about the enemy he obtained through the government authorities was a great help to my father in his activities. To help father, I used to keep watch, look after the champions of independence movement who visited the inn, and carry out secret liaison missions, going to Jungang and Gungdok and other places. One of my strongest memories from Jungang is that of wrestling with a Japanese boy bigger than me, who I got down with a belly throw. If a Japanese boy bullied Korean children, I would not let him get away with it. The owner of the inn feared that this might bring trouble later, but my father praised my courage, saying that one should never bow to those who look down on the Korean people. In those days, the anti Japanese sentiment ran high in Junggang, and the distribution of leaflets, a school strike, and the disposal of some wicked stooges were common. The enemy came to consider that all the changes in Gungang were connected with my father. The Junggang police station, acting on information from the police department of South Junggang province, listed my father as recalcitrant Korean and, quote, a person to be placed under the closest surveillance, and kept watch over him. At the sub-county office, Kang Ki-rak chanced to see a copy of my father's consensus register, in which his name had been underlined in red. He intimidated to my intimidated to my father that he had better leave as soon as possible for his safety, since the police had marked him down for arrest. Eleni, great to see you. In the meantime, the policeman serving at the Junggang police station let drop the remark that my father was going to be arrested. So my father could no longer stay in Junggang. We had to leave even the cold northern tip of the country, taking our bundles with us, and cross into a foreign land. A step on from Gunjang, and there was China. I could not hold back the tears that poured from my eyes as I rowed in a small boat across the river Umnak from the Jungduk ferry. Leaving Junggang meant my fourth removal. I had looked on Junggang as a strange place, but at the thought that I was having to leave it for a foreign country, it seemed as dear as my birthplace. At any rate, it was part of my homeland. Myungdae had cradled me, whereas Junggang and Ponghwa-ri were unforgettable places, which made me realize that Korea, wherever one went, had been converted into a prison by the Japanese imperialists. The day we left Gundang, it was unusually gloomy. The fallen leaves of late autumn drifted desolately up to the ferry. The migratory birds were flying in a flock towards the southern sky. The sight of them saddened me in spite of myself. Junggang was the last my mother saw of her homeland, and my younger brother, Cholju, was unable to return to his homeland after crossing the river. Man experiences many sorrows in his lifetime. The greatest of them is the sorrow of leaving one's country as a stateless person. However great a sorrow one feels when leaving one's birthplace, it cannot be compared with the sorrow one experiences when leaving one's homeland. If a birthplace can be likened to a mother, and a place away from home to a stepmother, I wonder what a foreign country, which is far stranger, can be likened to. The thought that I would be living in a foreign country where there were no people to welcome me, and where I could not make myself understood, disgusted me. Though I was young, and everything went dark before my eyes. But in silence I had to endure the sorrow of leaving my country, for the sake of my father's aim of winning back the country. The boatman groaned over the wretched plight of the Korean people, saying that more and more people were migrating to Manchuria. My father said that no one knew how many people had gone abroad, abandoning the fertile land of their birthplaces. Even before the ruin of the country, hordes of people from this country had left for the wilderness in Manchuria and Siberia to earn a living. People who had been deprived of the right to existence left the country in desperation, suffering cruel punishment. The waves of immigrants flowed to the United States, Mexico, and other countries on the American continent. Deceived by fine words that, quote, flowers are in bloom in all seasons. When seeds are sown, they yield a bumper crop. And if one works 3 hours a day, one becomes rich in 3 years. Unquote. Farmers and casual laborers who sailed over the Pacific to the American continent, where they were treated as barbarians and hired as servants in restaurants and rich men's houses, or were worked hard on plantations. My father said no one knew how many people had gone abroad, abandoning the fertile land of their birthplaces. Even before the ruin of the country, hordes of people from this country had left for the wilderness in Manchuria and Siberia to earn a living. People who had been deprived of the right to existence left the country in desperation, suffering cruel punishment. The waves of immigrants flowed to United States, Mexico, and other countries on the American continent. Deceived by fine words that flowers are in bloom all season, once seeds are sown, they yield a bumper crop, and if one works 3 hours a day, one becomes rich in 3 years. Farmers and casual laborers had sailed over the Pacific to the American continent, where they were treated as barbarians and hired as servants in the restaurants and rich men's houses.
The revolution that feeds the children gets my support.
Or were worked hard on plantations under the scorching sun. Nevertheless, they had their own country. After the ruin of the country, tens of thousands of farmers deprived of their farmland had drifted like fallen leaves through the desolate wilderness of Manchuria. The Japanese upstarts and merchants who had dreamed of a windfall swarmed to the land where our forefathers had lived from generation to generation, and the masters of the land, who had made it fertile, were driven out and were forced to wander off to foreign countries. So the plight of the nation, which has lost its state power, can be likened to the fallen leaves or roadside pebbles, I think. Every day now, children of the immigrants visit the ancestral land their forefathers abandoned. Whenever I meet them, I'm reminded of the wanderers I saw on the banks of the river Amnok. In Linjiang, many things were strange to me, and not good for me. But one thing was good. I saw little of the Japanese. Linjiang, a commercial town in Liaoning province, China, was a center of communications, linking Korea with North and South Manchuria. The Japanese imperialists could not openly extend their influence to China at that time, so they secretly sent in their special agents to threaten the independence champions. But Linjiang was better for conducting revolutionary activities than Zhengang. On arriving in Linjiang, my father made me learn Chinese under a Chinese teacher for 6 months, and then immediately saw to it that I was admitted to the Linjiang primary school. After starting that school, I began to learn Chinese in earnest. Later on, I continued to study at the Bagdaogao Primary School in Fusang Primary School number 1. That I gained a good command of Chinese from my early years is entirely thanks to my father. At that time, I did not understand fully why my father was so quick to make me study Chinese language and go to Chinese schools. However, looking back on those days, now I realize that father's foresightedness, based on his idea of aim high, was a great help to me. If my father had not made me learn Chinese at an early age, I might have had to face a great language barrier at every step of my life for the quarter of a century I spent in China. Without a good command of Chinese, it would have been impossible for us to gain a foothold in Manchuria, the major theater of our struggle, which was waged under the enemy's harsh repression, let alone an easy establishment of friendly relations with the Chinese people, and a success in effecting an anti-Japanese allied front with them. The Japanese detectives, who said to have hound sense of smelling, and the Manchukuo police did not suspect me to be a Korean when I was walking in the street dressed in Chinese clothes and speaking Chinese fluently. After all, I can say that my knowledge of Chinese language contributed greatly to the Korean Revolution. Father rented house through the good offices of Ro Kyang-do, an old acquaintance of his, and set up a surgery. He used one room as a surgery cum dispensary and hung up a large sign, Sumchun Surgery, on the outside wall. He also hung up a diploma from the Severance Medical College. He obtained the diploma from a friend of his prior to his departure from Pyongyang. After several months, Father was known as an excellent physician. That he won fame as a physician, though he began clinical practice only after reading a few books on medicine, cannot be attributed to his diagnostic skill, but to his humane treatment. Wherever he went, my father valued people. With unusual devotion, he treated and took good care of his fellow Koreans who, deprived of their birthplace and homeland, were leading a sorrowful life in a foreign country. Many patients visited Sunchun Surgery with little or no money. Whenever they worried about paying the doctor's bill, my father would tell them to pay it after the country had won its independence, if at all, and consoled them, saying, quote, "Though we are now living in poverty in a foreign country, the day is not far off when we will win back our country and cross the river Amnak again." Unquote. Our house in Linjiang was always alive with guests, just as in Panghang-ri. Among them were patients, but most of them were anti-Japanese champions. It was in those days that my uncle, Kang Jin-suk, came to Linjiang and formed the Paksan Armed Group. This was an armed group with independence champions, active in Pyongyang province, forming its backbone. The meaning of Paksan is Mount Paktu. In those days, the far-sighted people in Korea living in Manchuria set great store in the name Paksan. They called the private Korean school set up in Fusang Paksan School. The youth organization we formed in Fusang in December 1927 was also called the Paksan Youth Group. The Paksan Armed Group was a fairly large and well-knit grouping of large and small units from the Independence Army, the Linjiang and Changbai area. Its headquarters was in Linjiang County. The Paksan Armed Group was active in Linjiang, Zhenggang, Chosun, Hukchang, and other areas of North Pyongyang province, in Korea, and farther in activities reaching Pyongyang, Sutan, and Kangso area. After his arrival in Manchuria, my uncle, who had been active as a member of the secret youth organization in Pyongyang, became a lumberjack for a while, staying with us in Lianjiang until the armed group was formed. With the formation of the armed group, he was appointed commissioner for foreign affairs and became involved in conducting political work and raising war funds in North and South Pyongyang province. My uncle, together with the commanders of the armed group, frequented our house. In those days, Pyeon Tae-u and Kim Si-u, who was in charge of the financial affair of the Paksan Armed Group, visited our home, accompanied by my uncle. Its commanders often stayed at our home overnight. Other guests stayed in the front room, but my uncle always slept with us in the back room, with his pistol under his pillow. In those days, my father made great effort to prepare an armed struggle based on his progressive ideas, as required by the switchover in the struggle declared at the Kundian meeting. Father went frequently to Hongtuga to work with the Paksan Armed Group. When I woke up one night, I saw Father and my uncle taking a pistol apart under the lamplight. For some reason, the sight of it conjured up a scene before me of demonstrators cheering in the front of Pathang Gate at the time of the March 1st popular uprising. At that time, I had seen only rakes and sticks in the hands of demonstrators. But within a year, I saw a pistol in the hands of my uncle. Drawing a bloody lesson from the death of several thousand, the leading spirits of Korea, had armed themselves. A few days later, I received from my father the task of fetching some ammunition and gunpowder from Junggang. He seemed to have decided to entrust the task to me, since in those days, the adults were subjected to close examination at customs posts. I went to Junggang with a firm determination and came back safely, carrying with me a bag stuffed with ammunition and gunpowder. The policeman at the customs post had closely examined the people boarding the boat, but for some reason I had not feared them. Later, my uncle left Jingyang to work in the armed group in the homeland. But within a month, Corporal Kim Tuk-soo from the military police in Junggang came to Linjiang and informed us that my uncle had been arrested. Though he was a corporal in the military police, Kim Tu-soo was a conscientious man who did errands for my father on many occasions. On returning home from school, I found my mother weeping. The arrest of my uncle had stirred the whole of my family. After leaving Liangjiang, my uncle conducted vigorous activities in the Jaesong, Kaichon, and Pyongyang areas at the head of an armed group. He was arrested by the Japanese police on April 1921 in Pyongyang and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. He was imprisoned for 13 years and 8 months before being released on bail and dying in 1942. My uncle, who fought against gambling, drinking, and superstition, forming an enlightenment organization called the Minhang Society at his birthplace, came to join the noble movement to save the nation. This can be ascribed to the good influence of my grandfather, Kang Tong-uk, and my father. A revolution is not conducted by a few special people alone. If awakened ideologically and placed under a good influence, anyone is capable of rendering a distinguished service in the revolutionary struggle for the remolding of the world. After the arrest of my uncle, the enemy sent many secret agents and plainclothes policemen to Linjiang to arrest father. So he used to take shelter in his friend's house in the suburbs of Linjiang at night, while working at home during the daytime. But it became impossible for him to remain in Linjiang any longer. We had to move to another place in a foreign country, taking our household goods with us. The whole family left Linjiang carrying loads on their backs and shoulders. But it was impossible for us to carry all our household goods, so missionary Pang San-hyun accompanied us, taking them on a sledge to Bakdaogao, Changbai County, where we were to settle. It is about 62 miles from Linjiang to Bakdaogao. Like Linjiang, Badaogao was a border village near the river Amnak. As in Junggang, on the opposite side of the river from Linjiang, there were Japanese military police and a police substation. So in Fofyang, just opposite of the Bangdaogao, there were a branch station of the Japanese military police and a police substation. Though Fofyang is in the northern tip of Korea, the Japanese imperialists deployed repressive forces there densely, since the main arena of the independence movement had shifted to Manchuria. The secret agents, military police, and policemen sent from Pyongyang went to Badaogao and went wild, searching for patriots every day. My house was near the place where the river Baidao joined the river Amnak. Father hung up a new sign, Kangji Surgery, at our house. To the right of my house there lived the family of Kim, a member of the Korean National Association, and to the left another family, Kim, who ran a noodle house. Just across the street from my house there lived yet another family, Kim, who earned a living by selling noodles. In case you had any doubts that Kim was a common last name for Koreans. In her neighborhood lived the merchant brothers Kim, who furnished supplies to their armed units in the areas along the river Amnak under my father's direction. Thus, 4 family Kims who lived around our house were good people. Only the family who lived to the back of our house was questionable. It turned out later that Son Si Sim, the head of the family, was a secret agent for the Pyongyang police substation. Sun's family had lived in Zhengyang before moving to Bagdaogao after us to keep watch on my father on the instructions of the Japanese police. In Bagdaogao, my father contacted people from various walks of life. Among them was a thinker with the surname of Huang. While working as a clerk at the Namsa timber mill, he had embarked on the road of revolution under the influence of a progressive idea. He secretly carried out liaison missions for my father. After being given a task, he would leave Badagao immediately and fulfill it, wherever it was, and then return home and wait for another task to be given. Sometimes he had long talks with my father over a glass of wine. Once he commented animatedly on the situation, referring to an article in the newspaper Ashi Shimban. When my father went fishing, he followed him along to the riverside, carrying a pot stuffed with peppered bean paste, and caught fish and gutted them. He frequented our home for about 3 years, and one year he joined us in celebrating Harvest Moon Day. Father was many times taken to the Namsa timber mill by him, which was 50 miles away, and there he taught and rallied the workers around the anti-Japanese organizations. The teachers of Rajak Primary School, too, were given guidance by my father. One year, I'm not sure which year it is, the school went on strike, which caused a great sensation. Pyongyang Chapel was one place my father frequented in those days. It had no spire tipped with a cross, but it was an ordinary tiled roof. The only difference that marked it out from the other houses was that the whole of the house was a single room without partitions. See, even Kim Il Sung was able to organize in churches to meet people where they were at. Why don't you? After Father's arrival in Badao Gao, the chapel was used as a place for teaching people and as a rendezvous for the revolutionaries. Whenever a service was held, he went over to Pyongyang and conducted anti-Japanese propaganda. At times, he taught them to sing songs, accompanying them on the organ. When Father could not go, Mother or Uncle Huang Guan met those who had come to attend the service and conducted anti-Japanese education among them. I too went to the chapel, taking Chol Ju with me, and learned how to play the organ from Father. There were many places for secret rendezvous in the streets of Pyongyang, which Father had used. The cleaner at the Pyongyang police substation undertook clandestine work. When he discovered some secret information at the police station and conveyed it to the mail depository, the information would be sent to Father. I often went on secret errands for Father. Once, I sent some clothes and food to the patriots detained at Pyongyang police substation. The place I frequented most was the mail depository. Father told me to bring from the mail depository Tong-A Ilbu, Joseon Ilbu, and other newspapers, magazines, and publications from Korea. My father was in charge of the branch office of the Tong-A Ilbu. In the name of my uncle, Huan Gong, he received no pay, but got the newspapers free. I used to go to the mail depository a couple times a week. Unless the river was iced over, it was difficult to travel to. Difficult to travel to and from Pyongyang. But after the river was iced over, at times I went there every other day. When I was busy with my studies, Uncle Hyung Won used to go on the errand. When there was a lot of mail addressed to my father, Uncle Hong Guan and I would go at times over there together to fetch it. The mail was mainly parcels, magazines, and books on medicine published in Japan. When he went to Pyongyang, we received a great deal of help from Hong Jong-yu, an assistant military policeman. He became the supporter and helper of the revolution under father's influence. Of course, our relations with him were not satisfactory from the beginning. Badao was under the jurisdiction of the Pyongyang police substation. Subordinated to it were policemen from the police substation and the local customs officials. In those days, the military police organs had great authority in the border areas. Father and other members of the organization always kept movements at the observation post of the military police under close observation, and they too kept close watch on our house. When Hong Jong-yu first appeared at the dispensary at our house, wearing the uniform of an assistant military policeman, all my senses were on alert, and father and mother were careful guard against him. After looking around the dispensary awkwardly for a while, he said, "Today I have visited you merely to convey the compliments of Jang Sun Buk Evanju. When I left for my new post in the border area, he told me to seek out and meet his friend Kim Hyung-jik in Hanchang. I was eager to meet you and ask you for instructions." Unquote. His words and manner were very modest for a person wearing a uniform of a military policeman. But my father gave him a cold shoulder the first day. Quote, "You were on intimate terms with Corporal Kim Tuk-zu in Junggang. So what is the matter with you today?" Mother asked him after Hong Jung-ju left. The sight of Hong in the military uniform of a policeman reminded me of Pyongyang Gul, he said. Father regretted behaving like that towards Hong Jong-yu, who had gone to the trouble of conveying a greeting, and decided to treat him better next time. Later, Hong Jong-yu visited our house again. One day, father said, while talking with mother, quote, "If Jong-yu intends to make some secret inquiries into our house, I will make some secret inquiries into the military police through him. If I fail here, I will only endanger myself. But if I could win him over, with a great help, it would be for our cause. We have Kim Tuk-su in Junggang and Hong Jong-gu in Pyongyang. Wherever I go, there are military police." Unquote. From that day, my father gave Hong Jong-gu a positive education. Throwing aside the formal manner used to speaking to assistant military policemen, he behaved sincerely towards him as a compatriot and treated him well. Gradually, he began to open his mind. It turned out that originally he had had a national conscience. He was born in Suncheon, South Pyongyang province. However hard he farmed at his home, he could not make ends meet. So he took the examination for an assistant military policeman to make his fortune. But witnessing the barbarity of the gendarmerie and the police in cracking down the demonstrators during the March 1st popular uprising, he regretted his decision to sit for the examination and decided to go back to farming. At this juncture, he received a notice informing him that he had passed the examination and summons to attend drills. Thus, he became an assistant military policeman. The Japanese imperialists reduced their military police organs at home, set up and expanded their police organs on a large scale in Korea, and reinforced the military police organs in the border areas in the name of the reform of government organization, switching over from saber rule to civil government. Most of the Korean assistant military policemen were reappointed as policemen or transferred to the border areas. So, he came to Hanchang. One day, he came to my father and expressed his readiness to take weapons from the military police and join the independence movement. Father spoke highly of this courageous decision. Father said, quote, "It is praiseworthy for you to have decided to join the independence movement. Your Japanese military uniform has not corrupted you. How can we, who boast of 5,000-year-long history, meekly resign ourselves to slavery and bondage to the Japanese? I think it is better for you to help us in our work by remaining at your present post. If you wear the military police uniform, you may be able to help the independence movement in many ways. Unquote. Later, Hung Jung-yu helped the independence champions as father told him to. Often visiting father, Hung Jung-yu notified him beforehand on which day he would be standing guard at the ferry and what time, and told him to send anyone who wanted to cross the river during his duty. In this way, he saw to it many times that revolutionaries crossed the river safely. Thanks to him, my father, too, escaped critical situation on many occasions. When something unpleasant was likely to happen, to him, he would come over immediately to Ba Dao Gao and warn him, quote, "Some policemen will soon be here. Take care." Or he would say to my mother, "When Mr. Kim returns home, please tell him to go to the countryside and stay there for a few days." Unquote. One day, when he came over to Ba Dao Gao, having been given the task by the head of the military police substation of inquiring into the movements of the independence champions active on the opposite bank and the Koreans there, he saw the policemen from Pyongyang police substation escorting my father, who was bound with a rope to the ferry. Hong Jong-yu stood in his way and shouted at him, "He is one of our men who is working for the military police. Why have you arrested him without notifying me? If any question about Mr. Kim is raised, don't meddle, but notify me." Unquote. The policeman begged his pardon for his error and undid the rope which bound my father's arms. Thus, father escaped from a critical situation. On returning from patrol, a military policeman once said to the head of the substation that Dr. Kim was said to be a thinker and suggested that he be arrested and questioned. Hong Jong-gu showed them the logbook of the military police, which recorded information and said that it had all been obtained through Dr. Kim. He said, quote, "If you want to know the mood of thinkers, you should disguise yourself as a thinker. Only then can you grasp their innermost thoughts. Dr. Kim has rendered us a great service in her work." Unquote. The information was false, concocted by Hong Jong-gu himself. In May 1923, when the post of assistant military policeman was abolished, he said that he would come over to China with his family and join the independence movement. He did not want to serve the enemy anymore, he said. My father took great pains to dissuade him. He said, "You would do better to return home and serve in the police, continuing to help us in the work as before. And that will be of greater help to us than if you join the Independence Army and serve it. When you return home, please visit Myeongdae and convey my best regards to my parents." Unquote. On arriving home, he visited Myeongdae and gave my father's compliments to my grandparents. He served as a policeman in the homeland, as my father had told him to. On several occasions, he asked his superiors to transfer him to Taepyeong police substation and began to serve there in 1927. On arriving there to take up his fresh post, he visited our old home at Myeongdae, having a servant at the substation take wine, pork, and oranges, and offered my grandparents New Year's greetings. Myeongdae was under the jurisdiction of Taepyeong police station. Hong Jong-woo did not abandon his conscience as a member of the Korean nation, as my father had taught him, and consistently protected our family. He transferred to the Taepyeong police substation to protect our home in Myeongdae. When he was in charge of Nam Ri, my grandfather and uncle, Hung Rok, were less troubled by the enemy. The head of the police substation always told him to watch Kim Hyung-jik's family closely and search his house from time to time, since the family had a reputation of being anti-Japanese. But each time, Hung Jung-gu said he had found nothing special. Immediately after liberation, people everywhere caught and beat up the pro-Japanese, but Hong Jong-hu was left alone. Although he served as a pensioned policeman in his hometown, he did not incur people's hatred because he did not wrong them and always overlooked a violation of Japanese law. He was misunderstood because of his past, but never sought praise for what he did. An ordinary man would have written to me to dispel any misunderstandings, but he did not do so. Several years after the Fatherland Liberation War, I told some officials to search for him, and they succeeded in finding him in Suncheon. He was an old man of over 60 years. Nevertheless, I sent him to the provincial cadre training school to give him education. Even after graduating from the provincial cadre training school, he had a simple and quiet life, such being his natural disposition. He devoted his last years entirely to unearthing relics of my father's revolutionary history. A police uniform or title of a policeman was no impediment to those who decided to live conscientiously for the country and nation, like Hong Jong-gu. The important thing is not one's title or uniform, but one's idea and spirit. The education of the younger generation was always my father's concern during his time at Beidagao. Even after he left teaching for medicine, my father made great effort to educate young people as before. It was my father's conviction that only when many able cadres were produced by enlightening people at regular schools and evening schools was it possible to win back the country and build a rich and powerful independent country. The summer short course for Korean primary school teachers was held in Samyeopbu in the summer of 1924, when my father drew up detailed educational and musical programs for the pupils. A Korean school was established in the valley of Badagao through my father's efforts. Young people and children from Pyongyang learned to read and write Korean at the school, cooking food for themselves with rice that they had brought from home. Whenever he went, my father would say, "The education of the younger generation is the foundation of the national independence and state building. If a man is illiterate, he is as good as an animal. Only when man is literate can he prove his worth and win back his country." Unquote. Bearing what he said in mind, I studied hard. Baodao Gai Primary School was the 4-year Chinese school. Classes were conducted in Chinese and Chinese subjects were taught. There was no Korean school in the town. So on my return home from school, I received private education from my father. He taught me the Korean language, geography, and Korean history. Told me many stories about Lenin, Sun Yat-sen, Washington, and other famous men. He chose progressive novels or books, and for me and gave me the systematic guidance in reading so that I never failed to read the books he recommended and related my impressions after reading them. Thanks to him, I read many good books such as The Great Men of Korea, biographies of the Korean heroes, and revolutionary history of Russia and Lenin, and many newspapers and magazines. Father exercised tight control over my studies. When we neglected our studies, he at times made not only me and my brother, Cho Ju, but also Uncle Huang Gong stand up so he could lash us on the calf. Mother, too, showed a great deal of concern for my studies. When I was going to the mountains to collect firewood on returning from school, she would say, "Don't worry about collecting firewood. Do your lessons instead." So that I spent a longer time on my studies. Seeing mother so solicitous about me, though she led a life of hardship without even being properly clad, I always wondered what I could do to please her. Once, when I went over to Pyongyang, I brought a pair of rubber shoes for her with the money that she had given me to buy a pair of canvas shoes for myself, and I gave them to her. At this she said, "Though young, you think deeply. I don't mind what kind of shoes I wear. If you study hard and grow up fit and well, it will give me pleasure." Mother put her whole heart into making me marry and seeing that I grew up with a bright heart. So I grew up with optimism and free of any cares or worries. Looking back at my childhood, I think I was most mischievous when I lived in Baodao. Sometimes I worked such terrible mischief that the adults were astonished. How can we think of our child? How can we think of our childhood apart from mischief? When I recall the winter in Baodao, when we made a meter-wide hole in the ice of the river Umnak and jumped over it for fun after lining up on the riverside, it seemed to me that I am reliving my child's feelings of 70 years ago. We jumped over the ice hole, saying that those children who failed were not qualified to become Korean soldiers in the future. The children used to run towards the hole with all their might, taking it as a shame to be unqualified to become Korean soldiers. Sometimes the children, whose stride was too short or who were frightened, fell into the water, failing to jump over the ice hole. Then, as they dried the wet clothes of the children over the brazier, their families would complain, saying that because of Songju from the family, which had come from Pyongyang, all the village children might freeze. Oh, that dastardly Kim Il Sung! As the old villagers had heard that Songju was the head of the village children, they often muttered my name to lay blame on me for what had happened to their children. Getting demonized early on. He was used to it. He got used to it early, as you can see. Sometimes, I and the children played games of soldiers on the hill, behind Ba Dao Gao, till late at night, causing their parents to worry. Then, the people of Ba Dao Gai would search for us all night, losing their sleep. Because this happened frequently, the parents were stricter with their children. However, they could not lock up their children, whose thoughts were apt to take free flight. Once my classmate, Kim Jong-hang, brought a detonating cap he had taken out of a box kept in the shed of his house and showed it to us. The shed at his house was packed with weapons, clothes, shoes, and the like, which were to be sent to troops of the Independence Army. His brothers bought work clothes, shoes, and the like in large quantities through the agencies of Japanese companies and sent them to the troops, having furnished themselves with 2 boats and even horses. They bought in goods that by lots to supply the Independence Army. That day we played near the brazier, cracking pumpkin seeds. Kim Jong-hang whistled with the detonating cap in his mouth. In the course of this, the detonating cap came into contact with the embers and exploding, injuring him in many places. His brother wrapped him in a blanket and hastily carried him back to my father. If the police had heard that he had been hurt in an explosion of a detonating cap, it might have caused great trouble. So, my father hid him in the house, giving him medical treatment for more than 20 days. On that occasion, I learned that Kim Jong-un's family was one of patriotic merchants who distributed war supplies to the troops of the Independence Army. Those years were years full of adventure, but even in those days, I was shadowed by no care. As I grew older, my mental agony due to the ruin of the country increased.